The tragedy was set in motion in August of 2020, but like probably most of you, I didn't learn the story until last week. That was when the family of Larry Eugene Price Jr. filed a civil rights and wrongful death lawsuit after he died in solitary confinement in 2021 in an Arkansas jail. The 2020 arrest wasn't the first time Larry had encountered the police. After all, he was a black man in Arkansas with multiple mental health issues who was often homeless. As Newsweek remarked, Price's hometown police knew him well, mostly for criminal mischief, squatting in buildings, disorderly conduct, and for well-being checks when he, for example, would hurt himself. But when Larry wandered into the Fort Smith police station on August 19, 2020, and pointed his finger like a gun, threatening and cursing the staff there, police arrested him on a state felony, terroristic threatening in the first degree. Bond was set low at $1,000, but Larry still didn't have the $100 he needed for bail, so he languished in a cage for more than a year. Please note that no one was injured during the mental health crisis that provoked his arrest. Please especially note that Larry Price was never convicted of any crime. He was awaiting trial. And while he waited, he drew closer and closer to death. When emergency services arrived and tried to help him, Larry, who normally weighed around 200 pounds, weighed only 90 pounds. And though the Sebastian County Sheriff insists that staff provided food and water for him each day, Larry's official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. The details are horrifying, so much so that when the Fort Smith police spokesman learned the actual circumstances of Larry's death, he replied, "Oh, dear God, that's horrendous." State inspectors making compliance checks had already noted more than once that this particular jail was overpopulated and understaffed. The lawsuit connects these audits with an inability of the jail and its staff to adequately meet the needs of inmates, especially those with disabilities and mental illness. From the information available, this seems to be tragically true for Larry Price. The lawsuit focuses on Sebastian County Detention Center, where Price was imprisoned, and Oklahoma City's Turnkey, the healthcare provider contracting with the jail. The suit notes that staff did not properly monitor and document Larry's mental health, his medications, or his nutrition. He was not even allowed his daily hour outside of solitary confinement because his behaviors were considered erratic. Despite obvious signs of deteriorating mental health and dramatic weight loss, staff did not even tell higher-level medical or mental health providers what was going on. And please remember that this was happening over and over again over the course of an entire year. Staff were required to check on him every 15 minutes, resulting in tens of thousands of basically meaningless log entries. According to the suit, quote, between August 1st and August 29th, 2021, jail guards logged over 4,000 consecutive well-being checks of Mr. Price, and each time they made the exact same entry, inmate and cell okay. In the last 48 hours of Mr. Price's confinement alone, they made this entry more than 300 successive times. They continued to log these same words at least 4 times an hour, even in the hours and minutes leading up to his death, when Mr. Price was visibly malnourished, dying of starvation and dehydration. Shockingly, they made at least 10 additional entries, inmate and cell okay, after Mr. Price was pronounced dead. It settles in me as a gruesome mantra of the horrors of our status quo. Inmate and cell, okay. Inmate and cell, okay. Inmate and cell, okay. Larry's death was a preventable, terrible tragedy. As the attorney representing Price's family put it, "I've never seen a case where a pre-trial detainee, innocent in the eyes of the law, was held in solitary confinement for a year without ever having his day in court, and was so neglected that he wasted away and died looking like a starving prisoner of war." This loss is also in stark contrast to the love and joy that Larry shared with his family and friends. They are now left to grieve both how he was treated and the shocking failure of the system. Larry's brother, who himself works in corrections, believed the jail could have even been helpful to him. He said, "Price was homeless and in need of mental health help. I thought the jail could at least provide a roof over my brother's head, where he would be fed and watched over, and where he might get some psychiatric help and treatment. And the family was kept in the dark about what was happening inside the jail. No one would provide answers when I called, and the jail would not allow anyone to visit." Another friend lamented not being more active in helping Larry, feeling like she should have done more. She tried to visit him many times, but was not allowed. She never learned that Larry could have been released by paying $100 of bail. "They could have told me," she said. "I would have given up $100 to get him out of there so he didn't pass away like he did." There are layers and layers to this tragedy, and Larry's death is part of a larger story of how unsafe and unjust life is for countless human beings. He was criminalized and marginalized in so many ways. He was a black man, developmentally delayed, mentally ill, and destitute. But instead of being met with compassion and given the resources and support he needed to enjoy a full life, he was criminalized and locked out of sight, left to die. The painful reality is that we have managed to create a society where these kinds of tragedies happen with shocking regularity. The settings, they change. Prisons, hospitals, schools, workplaces, religious institutions, our homes. The relationships between the inequities and oppressive systems may shift emphasis: race, gender, class and poverty, disability, age, sexuality, and more. And each person's story is unique, but the experiences also form a pattern. External factors, such as our living and working conditions, make it more difficult for many people to enjoy a full life. Sometimes they make it impossible. Although we've been talking about aspects of this concept for hundreds of years, a useful framework that really came into the forefront in the early 2000s for helping us understand this dynamic is called the social determinants of health. The World Health Organization explains that social determinants are the non-medical factors that impact our health. These include issues such as income protection, access to education, food security, access to housing and basic amenities, social inclusion and non-discrimination, structural conflict and issues of justice, and access to affordable health care. The WHO explains that they are the conditions in which people are born, grow, work, live, and age, and the wider set of forces and systems shaping the conditions of daily life. These forces and systems include economic policies and systems, development agendas, social norms, social policies, and political systems. In countries at all levels of income, health and illness follow a social gradient. The lower the socioeconomic position, the worse the health. Importantly, research has demonstrated that social determinants are often even more influential than individual health and lifestyle choices on a person's health. Studies put the impact of social determinants between 30 and 55%. The good news, of course, is that these social determinants are almost entirely within our collective sphere of influence. The bad news is that although we've made progress, we still have a long way to go. The WHO explains that such trends within and between countries are unfair, unjust, and avoidable. Many of these health differences are caused by the decision-making process, policies, social norms, and structures which exist at all levels in society. Inequities in health are socially determined. I want to read that again. Inequities in health are socially determined, preventing poorer populations from moving up in society and making the most of their potential. Pursuing health equity means striving for the highest possible standard of health for all people and giving special attention to the needs of those at greatest risk of poor health based on social conditions. Social determinants give us one practical toolkit for both understanding the realities of social and health inequities and why it's essential for us to work together to transform them. Its framework can help us link our actions in the community with larger policies and movements. But the scope of social determinants can also themselves be overwhelming. It's easy to think about them and just feel powerless, both in the wake of devastating injustices we witness and experience, and in the face of those monolithic systems that make these tragedies mundane. Even the most effective framework becomes useless if it cannot be translated into meaningful action. David Lewis, analyzing the concept of civil society, encouraged what I think is a really helpful paradigm to explore concepts along two dimensions. On the one hand, he wrote, the concept may be useful to think with, in the sense of supporting analysis, which can help to make sense of political and social realities, while on the other, it may be useful to act with, by helping to inspire action on the ground. And the joining together of these two things is a key. If we only have understanding, we may just make ourselves more miserable. Understanding oppressive systems, for example, that's vitally important, but only if we don't stop with understanding. That understanding must also empower us to know how to act. Christy Heather Kenyon and Regina A. Garcia made this point again in 2016, that, quote, social determinants can and should also be understood as processes of participation and engagement, whereby individuals are able, through their own knowledge and actions, to improve health outcomes for themselves and others. Their table of types of health activism is a great example of translating theory into practice, and it's a good model for how we can reflect on how our own actions can become part of powerful movements. This is what empowerment looks like. In their words, claiming space, and in doing so, disrupting existing structures and the power they reflect and reinforce. Even at the most mundane levels of daily life, we can also be paying attention. Social determinants can help us become more aware of the gaps in our own lives and communities where our needs are not being met. They can also help us become aware of the things that are going well, where we are finding support, where our needs are being met. These supportive factors then can nourish our gratitude, teach us how to build community and social capital, and become sources of learning and strength to empower our activism towards social change. If you live with others, for example, and you get along with them, that is a cause for great happiness, something to use to build on. If they encourage you in establishing a practice that brings well-being in yourself and others, that is a reason for great happiness. If they practice with you, that's a reason for great happiness. Living with mutual care and support is both what keeps us going now and makes a pathway for greater well-being, equity, and justice in the future. Instead of becoming passive and powerless, we can learn to be more collectively aware and intentional about how we interact with, resist, challenge, and transform the social forces that otherwise dominate our lives and deaths and leave us feeling helpless. It may be premature to say that we can make avoidable tragedies impossible, but we can work together to make them increasingly improbable. It's a change that takes all of us. It takes what Daniel Berrigan and Thich Nhat Hanh called communities of resistance. In their book, The Raft is Not the Shore, Thich Nhat Hanh remarked that it is a resistance against all kinds of things that are like war. Because living in modern society, one feels that one cannot easily retain integrity, wholeness. One is robbed permanently of humanness, the capacity of being oneself. And there are so many things like that in modern life that make you lose yourself. So, perhaps, he wrote, first of all, resistance means opposition to being invaded, occupied, assaulted, destroyed by the system. Communities of resistance should be places where people can return to themselves more easily, where the conditions are such that they can heal themselves and recover their wholeness. We have inherited a long history of tragedies, and we are witnesses to and too often complicit with a society that manufactures new tragedies every single day. If we are not to lose ourselves, we must be intentional about honestly facing those tragedies, but that is not enough. We must also transform the witnessing into understanding, but that is also not enough. We must transform understanding into action so that there will always be communities of resistance, places where we can return to ourselves, places where we can heal ourselves and recover our wholeness. Thank you.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.